Hi everyone, Lisa Stones-Peck from Spellbound Miniatures here. Today's tutorial we're making the sleigh bed. There is a single and double sleigh bed file, so you can choose whichever size you'd like to make. In this tutorial I'm making the single version. And you'll notice in our files we colour code the materials. So there's several pieces in this file in red, and that's for craft board because we have some layered details you can put on, and the other pieces are in black, which is for mat board, but you could also cut them, as I have done, in basswood as well if you'd like to make a wooden version of this bed. Just need to make sure my mat board is just over 1.2 mil thick and the basswood is 1.5 mil, so when you're layering them up, just allow for any extra difference in the depth of the material there. The mat board I've made 2 layers of. I've already glued those together, so I essentially cut 4 pieces and I've got 2 pairs glued. There also is the base which the mattress sits on, and I've glued 2 pieces of those together, and then there's 1 layer each of the headboard and the footboard, and you also get 12 little squares which make up the 4 legs, and there's 3 squares on each leg. So depending on how many layers you'd like, glue the pairs together so you've got a side for each side of the bed and whatever thickness of base that you would like. And then we simply are going to glue the headboard into place on the side panel, and you do get a choice here of the style that you would like. You can fit there's a sort of a very soft corner here, and make sure you've got the headboard the right way up, so when it's the same thickness as the footboard, that's the right way up. You can put the corner of the headboard onto that corner of the frame and it will go straight up, and you can see it just lines up with there, and it will go straight up and doesn't come out the top. You could, if you wanted, depending on the sort of the top bit that you're going to put on here, you could start the headboard at this corner and then it would slope down to the base there, just to make sure that it doesn't ever stick out below this line here. So that's up to you. And before you do that, you'll probably want to consider, if you can imagine, when you've got a sleigh bed here, there's going to be, or let's put it either side of the base, so on the base there, there's going to be, I'm just making sure you can see it on camera, a scroll top there. Now, if you can imagine, I've got some pieces of dowel here. You can use dowel, and this is round dowel, and that would fit. You just cut it to fit in there. I've got several diameters of dowel, so that's up to you, whatever sort of effect you'd like. Or you can make your own scroll, which I've done here, and we've included in the craft board, which is the red part of the SVG file, a slightly longer piece of craft board. It will be the same width as the foot and headboard, but it goes up a bit longer, and that's to make these from. And we glue a piece, or I've used a kebab skewer here, on the top of the craft board. I'll just show you here with a piece of dowel. So we glue that on there, and when that glue's gone off, I used PVA glue to wet this craft board, and then I literally rolled it up very tightly. And when I got to the diameter that I wanted, I stopped, and so I kind of rolled it up like that, and then when it was the right diameter I stopped there and I put weights on there, literally let it dry like that, and then also put a bead of super glue on this inside edge to hold it fast. And you can see it's created a really nice sort of tightly scrolled piece of craft board. Get that on camera, can you see that? And the only real trick to this is when you're rolling it to make sure that it lines up on one edge, and as long as it lines up on one edge, because it's cut perfectly straight, it will line up on the other. So once you've done that, and I suggest leaving that to dry overnight, then I've got a pair of these. I think they get that there. So you can literally just chop the ends off with these. So you can put them in, and do be careful to keep your fingers out of the way. Put that right up to there, and then literally it will go flying across the room. Chop that off, and we've got a nice flush edge. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. Go and get those pieces later. So there we have it. I am going to be spraying this bed in a nice chalky white paint. So I just like to start off with the matte board in the colour sort of complementary to what the end one I want. It takes less painting then. So then, if you imagine if these were glued upright, this can sit there and be a bit like that. So that's up to you. And then when you've got your piece of dowel or this craft board scroll, you could have the craft board with the scroll coming over the top like that, and then the headboard would be underneath, or it can fit on the top, or you can have it this way round so that as the headboard comes up, it kind of hides the join on this side. You would see it from that side. So that's the only downside with making this craft board scroll is, unless of course if you're quite handy with a craft knife, you can literally cut down here and you could super glue the edge and sand it, and then you'd have hardly noticeable join there. So that's the only thing to decide when you're working out the angle of the headboard, is probably what you're going to use as your scroll. And then if you were going to have it upright, you would want your scroll. I always need two pairs of hands when I'm doing this. Your scroll would then more likely sit on that side, and you can always fill this edge and sand it, especially if you're going to be painting it. So I quite like that one there. It's up, sort of up and down straight, and then the scroll on the top. So that's probably what I'm going to go with here. So we'll glue that on so that it's perpendicular, and just check again that I'm happy with that scroll. Yeah, you could always glue the scroll in first, whichever you feel happiest and most comfortable with, but I'm going to go with that. So we've got a very straight perpendicular angle there, and then put it on this side. So I always use tacky glue for this. And again, I keep making sure, because it's only just off square, so it's make sure I've got it the right way around. That way it doesn't work, it's narrower, so that's the right way. So it's this edge that's going on. Wait for my tacky glue to come to the bottom of the bottle. Come along. There we go. And then I'm going to line it up with this bottom corner and straight up against this edge here. And then just make sure that I can still fit this on as I want to, and yes I can. So if you've got any excess glue, use a cocktail stick, wipe that out. And then we'll do the same with the footboard. Again, we'll put that exactly on to line up with this bottom corner and make sure it doesn't go any further out than this edge. And then we want to glue this one onto the other side. And then just check all around that everything kind of looks even and equal. You could put a little weight on there, just make sure it doesn't wobble too much. So I'm going to gently weigh that down with something, and then we'll leave that to dry and we'll come back. Okay, once that's dry, we're going to put it onto the base. And the only really tricky thing here is it can move a little, but kind of it's to your advantage, because if it was slightly off square, you can easily just nudge it back into square when you glue it down onto the base. So we just need to put glue on all 4 of these edges. And then it's probably easiest to put this on its side first and then offer the base up to it, because you know that they're at least flat on one level. And we're just going to aim again at the corners and then the top corners. Check these corners are good. And also there's a little wiggle room here. I don't know if you can see that. These sides can be pulled out or in a little bit. They might be slightly bowed from when you glued them. So again, it's good to press it all down in all angles and make sure it's all square, and wipe any excess glue off if there is any. And do a little bit of help down on that corner, that edge. And there we have it. That's the basic sleigh bed. It would look slightly different if you've angled your head and footboard. So we'll leave that to dry. Okay, so now this is all dried, I've taken my homemade dowel and I've actually cut the last piece off. Only do that if you've got a steady hand with an X-Acto knife. And then that means I can hide this join underneath, so that when I put it in place there, you can manoeuvre it round so you can't actually see it very well. And then I will be filling and sanding this join here, so it should look pretty seamless. So we just need to glue these ends and that edge there. And if you find that your homemade dowel is a little bit thick, you can sand the edges down. These ones, I did put some super glue on those once it was dry to seal them, and then you could sand that if you needed to. So we'll put that in there. Press that onto there. You kind of want to hold it in two places, there and there, but I've got some clamps, so they're always handy. Clamp this top edge. And it doesn't take long for this glue to go off anyway, so if you do have to hold it, it takes a couple of minutes. Get if you can see any glue squeezed out in there, you can wipe that off, but I'm going to fill and sand that anyway. Can you see that? So probably, if you're going to make your own dowels, I'd suggest do those the night before so they're completely dry and solid when you want to build the bed the next day. So there we have the basic bed. Needs a little filling and sanding, and then we've got the feet. I've gone for the offset version of the feet, so I will be putting it that way so that all the edges line up on the outside and then the inside is staggered, so that, hang on, when you look at it this way around, it has a slightly oriental feel to it, which is what I was going for. This is slightly OG shaped there, so that's what I've gone for, but you could do these centralised feet also. So we just need to glue those on. So there's the feet in profile. Okay, before you actually decide to build your sleigh bed, you might want to put layers on, and I suggest you do those before you construct it. It's much easier to press them together when they're flat like this. But I'm showing you this in basswood and brown craft board because I think it's easier for you to see the layers on camera rather than the white on white bed that we're actually building in the tutorial. So this is currently one layer of basswood. And the brown craft board, it takes a stain as well as wood, and you can also varnish it. So it's a really good either substitute for wood or complementary to wood. So this craft board, as you can see, it's really thin. And so you do need to be careful when you're cutting this on your mat. I use a green mat, my blue one's not sticky enough, and a fine point blade, and I do that trick where we turn it over once it's cut and slowly peel the mat away from the craft board. If you try and lift the craft board off, it can, being so thin as we've cut this layer, warp a little. So that's the trickiest bit. If you're finding it very difficult, I would just cut one at a time and make that the only thing you're taking off your mat, rather than cutting all the craft board pieces and trying to get them all off at the same time. So you can see there that it's a very thin outside layer, and to glue this on I would suggest lining up again these bottom corners first. So I would glue that corner, just a little dot or super glue first, and this one, and then it's easier to glue. Everything else kind of falls into place once you've got the bottom straight, and then you can do any or none of these. So You could just leave that layer on. We've got some infills to look like panels, so you could put those on too. And then we've also done some tiny little circles to add onto this scroll detail at the top. It's difficult now, it's not glued down at the moment. That one's going to be difficult to get on. I will show you this if I can close up. Oh. And you can also decide whether you want your scrolls all to, let me see if I can get this, how close I can get this. I'll probably put a photograph in here of this close up. You can have the scrolls, the fancy word is concentric, and then so that means they're either one on top of the other very evenly spaced, or you have them slightly offset, and I think that actually looks better. It tricks the eye for some natural movement there. So you could do this as well. If you're going to do the layers, I would suggest glue these and press them down flat before you construct, because if we were going to try and put these on now, and I have got white layers, it's harder to press them down once everything's built. So that's something you can decide. If you think this might be too thin or too difficult to do at the minute, just do the straightforward bed. And you can also cut, you could just do the panels without the delicate frame, and you could just put one level of scroll detail on to make it more like a modern take on this bed. They often have just a slight panel detail and nothing too fancy. So you could, oh god, that's the wrong one there, I need a bigger one. You could just do that as well. I don't know if that's going to show up. White on white is quite difficult on camera. So that's up to you. So now all the glue's gone off, the next stage is to fill and paint this. You could use wood filler. My wood filler is brown, so I'm going to use, we call it polyfiller here in the UK, spackle I think we call it in the US. Just a little thin bead along there, and when that's dry I'll sand it all down. And then I will spray prime this. I'm waiting for the chalk paint spray to arrive. And I'm going to coat that with a couple of coats of that to give it a very nice modern country feel. So I'll do that, I'll build the wooden bed. I'm going to stain this walnut. So what I would suggest is if you've got basswood and you want to stain it, stain the pieces first, because once you've glued them, if there's any overspill from the glue, the stain won't take. So I always stain everything first and then glue it. So make sure to do that if you want to stain your pieces as well, and then I'll put a matte varnish over the top of that. Okay, I've got my all-purpose filler. I'm using a glue spreader here, and you don't want loads. Can you see that? I'm just literally going to put it in there. And I am going to use my finger and just smooth over and take any excess off. Can you see that? White's very difficult to show. It's always better with filler to start off with a little bit and build up, and sand it and then build up again. All we're trying to do is stop the shadows here. So there we are. Looking better already. I'll wait for that to dry. I'll lightly sand it and I'll do a second coat if I think it needs it. And you can always go round if there's any other gaps and fill those. I've got a tiny little one here where the headboard didn't quite meet the bottom of the base there. And again, if you're using wood, I'd use wood filler at this point. And again, on these edges, if you've got a gap that you don't like where you glued the dowel on, put some filler around there. Also, once I've spray primed, I'll give it a light rub down anyway, because priming often brings up the grain in wood, and also on mat board it can lift the fibrous edges. Now I've started this, I won't know where to stop. Right, I'm going to leave that for now and we'll come back when I've finished.